The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello, thank you for joining today's webinar sponsored by Index Engines. Today we're covering the topic defensible disposition and developing a strategy around managing and disposing of data. I'm going to loosely use a case study. It's a large financial services firm that's a little bit shy about using their specifics of their data, but they've given us permission to talk about their projects in general. So it's an ongoing project that we've been working with them for a number of years. And I have some general stats, but in general I'll give you a concept of what they've been doing. My name is Jim McGann. I'm VP of Marketing at Index Engines, and I will be your presenter today. If you do have questions, there's a chat area or a question area on the right portion of your screen. Feel free to type in any questions there, and we'll get back to you either during the session or once the session is done. And we're going to go for about 30 minutes today. For those of you that are not familiar with Index Engines, we're an enterprise software company. We provide an information management platform that allows customers to understand their data assets, mostly their unstructured user data and email, across different classes of storage, the networks, desktops, file servers, as well as legacy backup environments. Allow them to find, profile, and manage that content, support both data center migrations as well as things like information governance policies, and really support large-scale enterprise deployments. We have clients that range from deployments that are in the small number of terabytes to a large number of petabytes of content. So the client that we've been working with for a number of years, one of the projects they've been dealing with, they have a number of projects going on with the Index Engines platform. One of the more current projects is a departmental server that they've been focused on cleaning. It's mostly client services data, a mix of customer records and email communications and files and so on. It's about 100 terabytes, so it's really more of a departmental user share. Their challenge and why they kicked off this project is they understood that it was largely unmanaged data, data that was just users had control of to manage the data, create it, store it, and manage it on the network. The costs were an issue. One of the driving factors to kick off this project was they were continually upgrading the capacity on this server, and they were at a point where they knew that a large portion of it was aged out data, redundant data, trivial data. So they knew that there was some issues around that, which wasn't the overall driving factor. The thing that pushed them over the fence here was really more about the fear of the risk and the liability of that content. A lot of it was email communications, a lot of it customer records and contracts. So there was a lot of sensitive data on there that they knew could pose a risk or a liability down the road. So when they look at it from the cost of managing and upgrading the server and capacity to the risk and liability, it was really something that they decided to really focus on and develop a policy and clean up. And one of the great things about defensible disposition is you really can start on specific projects and point to maybe a shared user server or a departmental server or even an email environment to be able to focus on a small project and in order to get it done. A lot of our clients had been focused on large-scale projects that had a 5-year timeline, and those things never seemed to get done. So this was more of a smaller pocketed project, and it was really, focusing on that data that was managed by users to be able to, control the expense and the liability. So the deployment there, it was really, we worked initially with the IT organization that connected us with their records management team, which the records management team is interesting. They had a mix of, compliance and regulatory legal type folks with IT-ish type folks that would be managing the project. So it was people that were familiar with the technology, but also familiar with legal practices and so on. And so there was a lot of, project strategy development around this and on how they were going to deploy this out in a logical phase. So it was really, IT was really kind of the arms and legs to put the technology in place and provide a level of knowledge of what exists. And the records management folks really were kind of focused more on the usage and the analysis of the data. So they broke it down into 4 high-level phases. Phase 1 is really understanding what's there. So one of the things when they started this project is really they started to develop strategies on disposition, and they're like, why don't we figure out what's there first before we develop any disposition strategies, which is always our best practices is you really can't determine what to do with the data unless you understand what you have. So once they did that and understood what they have, which is really more data profiling and classification, they analyzed it to understand, iterate on different views, and really go deep into it to figure out specific classes of content. I'll show you how they broke that down. And then phase 3 is they determine the disposition strategy. And one of the key benefits of the data profiling platform is that you can really, based on certain criteria, whether it be metadata, dates, owners, locations, types of data, you can route it to specific areas, whether it be an archive, the cloud, or purge the data. So, and then the execution phase. So phase 1 is really more the data profiling, and data profiling is really provide reporting tools to be able to focus on the unstructured data, user data, and email to understand what's there. And they didn't really have database content on these servers. It was really more loose files and email content. Most of the email was really PSTs or just loose email that was on the server. You know, it wasn't their email server, so it was mostly unstructured content and email that was saved by the user. So the reports were based on metadata such as dates, you know, create date, access date, modify date, as well as owner. So owner will give you things like you know, who created the document and so on. Location, size of the files, types of the files, as well as duplicates. So a lot of the redundancy that exists on these servers is pretty shocking when you look at it and analyze, you know, terabytes of data. You'll find that there's terabytes of redundant data that exists there because users love to copy files and content, especially the large files. One of the important features as well is the integration with Active Directory. So Active Directory is really your controls for logging into the networks. When you log into your network or your email is controlled by the Active Directory server. So that gives an added level of intelligence for data profiling where you could summarize data by department. So instead of looking at specific owners of content, you could say what data is owned across the network or across the server by the HR department or R&D or marketing or so on. But another added benefit of Active Directory is you can look at active versus inactive users being ex-employees. So your IT organization, when working with Active Directory, what they're going to do is you know, people that are no longer with the organization, they keep them as a user in Active Directory, but what they do is make them an inactive user. So in phase 1, the sample reports, these are the types of reports. These are some of them. They did some very specific queries which were kind of more proprietary. And that's the beauty of the data profiling is that you can customize it with a combination of filters and queries and keywords and metadata and so on to really make it your own and really look at data and go deeper into it and analyze it. It's a very iterative, dynamic process. So the types of reports that they created, which are more things that could be shared, are looking at age data. So age data is stuff that has not been accessed in more than 3 years. So it's just beyond 3 years, they thought it was something that just kind of faded back into the ether and no one knew that it existed. They broke out abandoned data, and what they mean by abandoned data here is data that's owned by ex-employees. So someone that, according to Active Directory, is an inactive user, so it's owned by an ex-employee and not accessed by current employees. So there was a class of data that was owned by ex-employees that current employees was still using, so it was still active data. But there was a large portion of data that was owned by ex-employees and not currently accessed by current employees. So not to say that it doesn't have value, but no one knows that it exists, and it's kind of hidden on the network. And if you think about it, when your employees leave the organization, you know, most organizations will recycle or clean their laptop or desktop hard drive, but all the stuff that they own scattered about the network on file shares just sits out there and you know, hides forever. Then there's duplicate content. That's pretty obvious. I mean, there's a lot of redundancy on the network, you know, where users are saving you know, old PowerPoints and documents and files and spreadsheets and so on. There's a lot more of that than you think. Sensitive data was their really major concern, more for the risk and liability. You know, really looking for things like PSTs. So, when users save PSTs on their desktop or save them on file shares, that's just a mini archive of significant volumes of email, and that for them has posed an issue in the past. So a liability that can't be managed by their email archive is something that's outside that. PI, which is personally identifiable information like social security number, credit card numbers, especially in email communications or contracts or agreements and so on, applications. And then keywords. So with certain areas or certain types of files, they were doing some more keyword analysis to look and see if there's anything out there like contracts and things like that. They also looked for multimedia files, so there was a lot of, being this was a customer service environment, there was a lot of lower-level employees that would save things like vacation photos, videos, like download movies, audio. iTunes specifically was one of the queries they were doing, looking for iTunes directory paths. So that's stuff that was really not business data, but stuff that was clogging the network and really could have some risk around copyright and so on that they just didn't want to keep around. Active data is the stuff that's being used today, so it's the stuff that's being accessed, modified, and created within the last 3 years. And that's interesting when you first look at a file server like a 100-terabyte server and just see really how much data on there is active. You'll be surprised it's a very small portion of the data that exists there. The rest of it is stuff that has become aged or outdated or trivial content. And then dark data. Dark data is what they considered was data of value that's hidden and unknown. So there may be content that they know, certain criteria that exist, such as research or certain documents that people don't know no longer exist. It could be owned by ex-employees. It could be owned by people that have just forgotten that it exists. So finding that content. So these were kind of sample reports that they generated. This is a little bit of a crowded view, but it shows some of the reporting capabilities, and this is a sample of the Index Engines Catalyst platform that shows you the reports from graphics to looking into content, that's looking in finding PI in documents, to keyword searches to get hit results, to filtering based on file types, to reports and charts based on data access times and so on. So there's kind of a sampling of the different reports that are available in the system. It's not the actual reports that they've used, which clearly I can't present to you, but it's the same interface that they use to analyze the data. So phase 2, what they did was they bucketed and classified it into different groups. So data of value, that's the stuff that was taking those different policies. That was the active and dark data. So it's really things like old reports and research and content like that. And their goal here was to look at that. That's the key stuff that they wanted to find. So what they wanted to do is ensure that that stuff is available and accessible to those who need it. So the stuff that's active and used, people obviously know where it is, and it's available. The dark data was interesting for them, so they looked at content that was important, searched and found it, and made that available to the folks that could use it. So a lot of it was research data or old contracts that really should be in archives and so on, and made sure that stuff was secure. The second bucket that they classified was really the aged, redundant data. So that's the data that really has outlived its business value. And there was a lot of conversation about cleaning this up and purging it or defensively deleting it. That what they ended up doing was really migrating it to a cheaper storage environment. A lot of it went out to cloud storage and get it off the network or get it off the server, which frees up significant volumes of space. And then the last area was sensitive data. Email and files containing things like PI, PSTs, contracts, content that they could really uncover based on either keyword search, metadata search, or pattern search. And that content was migrated to the archive for long-term preservation if it really wasn't actively being used. And if it was being used, then they took some other precautions to make sure that that data was secure. So these are the 3 major buckets that they went into. These are typical statistics, so their numbers are kind of buried in here. I can't really use their numbers, but these are typical statistics that we see, and we engage with many, many customers worldwide that are doing these types of projects. And in redundancy or duplicate content, you'll see volumes that are reaching anywhere from 25 to 30% redundancy, depending on the type of business they are or the type of department or type of worker that they are. You'll see significant volumes in redundancy. In terms of age data, this varies pretty widely. I mean, pretty commonly you'll see 10 to 20% of data that is aged out, older content, and in some cases we see numbers that get significantly larger than that. and a lot of that is age redundant. So not all these numbers are going to add up clearly to 100% because there's significant overlap here. But abandoned data, when you combine that in, the age data to the abandoned data, that's getting upwards of 40% of data that's really old and the owner no longer exists. So that represents the largest chunk of what exists there is when you combine these two areas together. And then data that contains sensitive content, they had closer to 10%, they had a larger volume than they really liked. A lot of it was everything from customer tax records to applications and contracts and things like that that had a lot of social security number, a lot of credit card number, order information, and so on. And then PI multimedia content. This is a small number, however, it's large files. So there's a large number of iTunes libraries, believe it or not, and large videos that exist out there. So it's stuff that your IT organization is protecting and managing and controlling. So for that, there was a large volume of that content. There really wasn't a lot of restrictions on the server as to what kind of content can be stored there and saved there. So it was really kind of a hodgepodge and mix of all sorts of content. So really what it left them is only somewhere between 20 and 30% of the data on there was active data with business value. So when they continue to upgrade servers and add capacity and so on, really what they're trying to do is make room for that 20 to 30% where the bulk of it is really stuff that really could disappear tomorrow and no one would miss it. So phase 3 is really covering their disposition strategy. So in terms of disposition, they had a number of different things that they were really going to focus on. And really what they wanted to do was to get data, mostly clean up the server and manage it. And cloud storage was big in terms of their strategy. They had secure cloud storage where they wanted to migrate data, and that's the stuff that they really couldn't determine what to do with. What they did was they migrated that data to the cloud as the data with little and no value. Deletion, the stuff that they felt comfortable deleting was the stuff that was redundant content that was owned by ex-employees, so the employee is no longer there, and no one's accessed it in more than 3 years. So that's a classification bucket that they created, and they all felt confident that if we purge this content, it's redundant, so we're not getting rid of unique content. The employees are no longer here, and no one's really touched it. We feel comfortable in purging that data out, and that was deleted, and that was a significant portion of the content. The sensitive content was sent to their archive. They have a pretty significant archive deployment. There was some encryption on some of the most sensitive content, and some of the encryption that they did was really more at the storage level. They didn't really encrypt into individual files, but they moved it into encrypted directories and so on. And then personal multimedia content, really what they ended up doing there was finding the top 50 or so violators of that had large files with no need to have large files, and notified their management that content needed to be cleaned up by X date, or else they would just purge it out. So it gave the employees some time to get rid of it. Otherwise, it was deleted out. So that was their general strategy to be able to clean stuff out. So one of the questions that came up is what reliable method is there to recognize redundant data? So there's a couple of different ways. So within the Index Engines Catalyst platform, there's a couple of ways you can do that. Is you can look at data by metadata redundancy, so same file name, same path name, and same last modified date kind of thing. Or if you want it to be more confident, there's a MD5 hash that's created looking inside the file that will create a exact document signature. So if they have exact document signatures, you can ensure that they're the same file. So there's a couple of different ways that you can look at to recognize redundant data. So phase 4 was execution. So getting all this stuff to happen over time was not as difficult of a challenge as you would think, because they really took their time, and this occurred over a series of months. They took phases, and when they educated the users saying this is what's going to happen based on the policies of the data and had them buy into it, it was done over time. There was ongoing audits that occurred to ensure that the strategy was sound. And then users, the data was migrated to the cloud, the users had access to that age data. So when the Index Engines product can indexes data, you can move the index data as a whole to a cloud environment or to another storage platform and keep it indexed so that you could search it and manage it going into the future. One of the things that some people think with the data profiling is that you're going to go in there, profile the content, clean it up, and then be done. So what they did was it's not actually true. So what they ended up doing was keeping all these policies built within the platform so that it could be executed at any time. So redundant data is created on an ongoing basis. Data ages out on an ongoing basis. People will continue to load, photos and iTunes libraries on an ongoing basis. So using these profiles that were created or these queries that were created, you can execute it against the server at any time to go continually do the cleanup. So they were doing ongoing audits constantly to ensure strategy. And we had a client that thought they had cleaned up and stopped users from creating PSTs because PSTs were not something that they really endorsed, especially with their legal liability and their risk. So what they ended up doing was doing an audit on their networks and found like 14,000 PSTs across their network, which for them was a surprise, but something that they were happy to find in advance of any kind of lawsuit that required production of that data. Once you clean up, creating these policies and keeping them in place to manage the data in place or the active data so that it doesn't occur again in the future is really key and really important. So the way they measure their return on investment, and they have some pretty cool models that they used, but the fact that they reclaimed more than 50% of their storage capacity was a hard number that was easy to see and understand, and it really eliminated needs for expensive upgrades that were in their plan. So it recouped a lot of that expense. And that was really one of the obvious benefits. And I think when we see any of these data disposition projects that occur, getting a benefit for the IT organization that's got large budgets that they need to control is really key. But also tying in the the other organizations, the business units, and the compliance and legal teams as well was important. But the IT benefit, just not acquiring new capacity was huge. But they also could measure the reduction in their data management expenses. So if you think about 100 terabytes, that data is backed up and protected on a continual basis. The fact that they can eliminate from their backup window, eliminate it from the facilities from inside their firewall in the data center, and stop managing it, there was definitely hard costs that were associated with that as well that really showed them the benefit of doing these kind of disposition strategies. And then, obviously the legal team and the compliance team were happy with the last one, which is really management of risk and liability of that sensitive content. So in terms of data profiling, the Catalyst solution from Index Engines is really a simple solution that could be deployed as a server or as software only. Here we're showing as a server, but it can connect to multiple data sources, online network data, desktops, email, including Exchange and Notes, supports archives such as SharePoint. So you kind of pick your poison and determine, what's your pain point or what's one of the areas that needs attention more seriously than others. In the online world. It also supports offline environments like backup tapes and disk-to-disk backups as well. So you have a lot of flexibility there. You develop those policies. We talked a lot about that today in terms of, what do we want to do? Clean up duplicate content, large files, abandoned data, PI, risk data, e-discovery content, and so on. And then you develop your disposition strategies, archiving, cloud migration, encryption, data tiering, defensible deletion, and so on. So it's really a three-phase approach, which is fairly common out there. To help clean and manage content. One of the things as we wrap up, we're trying to keep to 30 minutes today, is we do have a free trial of the product available. If you go to our homepage on our website, indexengines.com, you'll see a download a free trial. It's a VMware version of the product available for 1 month on 1 terabyte of data. If you want to interested in downloading it, trying it yourself, you're welcome to do that. If you want us to work with you on it and do a proof of concept on your environment, we're happy to do that as well. But the free trial allows you to do the reporting, analysis, and classification of that content. And feel free to contact us or send me an email. I'll put my email address up, and we'll get you connected with that link as well. There's also a great white paper that's available, Leverage Data Profiling to Support Intelligent Disposition. I'm happy to shoot that out to you as well. My email address is on the screen, and get that out to you. And if you do have questions, I know there was another one that came in. What about Microsoft Access, small databases? Can this be included in the process? Yeah, so databases are living dynamic creatures. So Most of our full content indexing will occur on the unstructured files in email. For databases, we don't go inside those containers and index the content, but you can still do metadata level profiling on that, so you can find locations, ages, and last modified dates and things like that for things like databases. So it does support it at some level, not the full content that other solutions require. If you do have additional questions, I'm being told I need to cut off here, send me an email or check out our website and send us an email through our contact page. But if you also want to see more detail on the product or see a demonstration of the technology, we'd be happy to line that up and show you how it works. So thank you all for your time. Appreciate it, and we look forward to dealing with you in the future.